Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and my Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Our guest today is Priyanka Bakaya, and she is an extraordinary young social entrepreneur recognized internationally for her work in cleaning up the oceans by helping us convert crappy plastic. And not all plastic is crappy, but helping convert crappy plastic back into oil and fuel that can be used efficiently. Priyanka, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
We're excited to learn more about how you do this, but it seems to me, let's start with plastic. Let's talk a little bit about the problem. What is the problem with plastic?
Sure, yeah. So, something that really shocks people is that in the US, only 9% of our plastic waste gets recycled. And unfortunately, the reason it's so low is because there are so many different types of plastic. And in order to recycle plastic, you need to have a pure stream. And once it enters the waste stream, it becomes very hard to separate. So really the problem that we're trying to solve is what to do with the rest of that plastic. And most of it either enters landfills or it enters the environment, and huge amounts are entering the oceans each year. Roughly 8 million tons of plastic waste enter our oceans every year. And what we're working on is trying to find a solution for all that plastic waste that can't be easily recycled. And since plastic comes from fuel, our solution is to convert that plastic waste back into fuel.
Now, some plastics can be more readily recycled into other plastics than others. Talk to us about how that works, why that is.
Sure. So typically the most commonly recycled plastics are the ones with the highest numbers, number 1 and number 2. So number 1's PET, the water bottles and soda bottles. And it's a really easy identifiable plastic. When it shows up at a recycling center, they can easily sort it out because it's all the same plastic. So that has a high recycling rate. And then number 2 is the HDPEs, the things like the foggy milk bottles and shampoo and detergent bottles. It's also just very easily recognizable. So those two get recycled quite well, but then all other types of plastic like packaging, bags, takeout containers, things like straws, utensils, they're just all so mixed and commingled that they become very hard to separate out and recycle.
So what do you do with that crappy plastic that's hard to recycle?
Sure. So the great thing about our process is we don't need to separate out the plastics into specific types. We break down the plastic back to its molecular form that it started out with. So we're basically reversing the process that created the plastic and breaking down long carbon chains and making shorter carbon chains that resemble fuel. So diesel, which is our main product that we aim to make, that's a C12 to C20 chain. So basically we're just sort of using our process to break down those chains and convert it back into a usable fuel. And since plastic is 100% energy, we get, almost, 100% energy back from it.
What kind of toxic emissions result from your process? What kinds of byproducts are there that you have to deal with that are messy and gross?
Yeah, so the great thing about the process is it's much cleaner than other things that people have tried in the past, such as incineration. So with incineration, you burn waste, and the oxygen that you're using to burn creates dioxins, and that's very harmful. What we're doing is our process is completely enclosed and oxygen-free, so it doesn't create any of those dioxins, and we're just, taking it back to its original composition. So there's no toxic emissions that result out of the process. What we do get is a few percent after the process goes through our system will come out as a inert char material, and that's a non-toxic substance. It's basically whatever was attached to the plastic that hasn't converted into fuel. So things like the
label, dirt, sugar, whatever.
Right, exactly.
So did you create and invent a new process, or did you discover a process?
Yeah, so what we did was, we knew that scientifically it was known that since plastic comes from fuel, it can be converted back into fuel. But no one had figured out how to do this at a large scale and how to do this commercially and how to make it viable. And really what our innovation was, taking something that can be done at a small scale and saying, hey, there is a way to do this at a large scale and make it, run continuously and efficiently and, make it automated enough that the economics actually make a lot of sense. And so our operating costs to, produce each barrel of fuel is $25 to $30 per barrel. And, previously when people had tried it, had been like, over $60 a barrel, that was the operating cost. So it didn't make sense. So really our innovation has been to reduce the cost at a large scale to make it really economic.
Yeah, so the price of oil today, I haven't checked in a few weeks. Is it $30, $40 right now?
Yeah, it's in the 40 to 50 range.
Or 40 to 50 range.
And
okay, so you've got some good margin right now.
Yeah, and we make diesel, which is a premium product to that crude oil price. So it's usually trades around $20 a barrel above it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so your finished product isn't ready to become diesel. Your finished product is diesel.
Right. Yeah, we make the finished product ourselves.
Yeah. So at if you're producing diesel at $25 a barrel, that's like a really, really good deal. It's a really compelling model, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
you want to do that all day long.
Exactly.
And then at night too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's remarkable. So what you're doing now, your business model, tell us what it is, because I don't think you really are focused on operating a plant to produce as much diesel as you want. You're about producing plants to produce diesel, right?
Yeah, so our vision is to really deploy this technology in as many places as possible. And
can it be deployed? Sorry to interrupt, I'm excited to hear, but you can deploy this if it's not wasteful. You can do it in somewhat urban areas. Now, you and I happen to both be in Salt Lake City, and I want to make a point here that's a little bit of an embarrassment, or it should be an embarrassment to those of us who live in Salt Lake. But in Salt Lake City proper, within full view of downtown Salt Lake City, there are 5 oil refineries, and all of them produce toxic waste. Right? And so those toxins blow and float just right through downtown every day, all day, 365. What about your plant? Your plant wouldn't do that, would it?
Yeah, there's no toxic emissions at all from our facility. We are classified as like a low emitter. We don't require any special permitting.
So your plant could go in a place where they actually need diesel fuel, like an urban area, without creating a problem.
Yeah, and we are, basically 10 minutes from downtown here in Salt Lake, and it isn't an issue.
Yeah. Well, you're still farther away than the refineries, I think.
No, we're before the refineries. I can see them out.
Oh, really? Oh, you're over there. Okay. I was thinking you were a little further out in West Valley. Okay. That's tremendous. I'm glad. So where are you seeing your plant customers actually putting them relative to the cities that they're in?
Yeah, I mean, what makes the most sense is to co-locate where the plastic is, because plastic takes up much more volume than the fuel we create. So it's good to be right at the source, so you reduce the transportation burden of transporting the plastic waste. And where we see the most demand are places that generate a lot of waste and have a high tipping fees. So we've seen a lot of interest along the East Coast. And actually our next facility is going to be in the East Coast in Canada, Nova Scotia. And we're going to be located right on site at a waste processing facility. So the material that's coming off the facility, the plastic that can't be recycled, will enter into our system right there on site. And that's sort of the perfect model, is to have it really right there on site, or within, like a close radius of where the plastic waste is coming. And for us, it makes sense to really try to partner with some of these recycling companies who are already collecting the plastic waste and taking their residual stream of the plastics that they can't recycle, since they have such high volumes.
Yeah. Now, converting plastic to oil or to diesel rather than converting it to plastic seems really appealing to me, but how does that compare economically? Would it make sense to convert your 1 and 2 type plastics to oil or to diesel using your model, or is it still better to convert those plastics back into other plastics?
We don't, as a company, our mission is not to compete with existing recycling because, the more you can try to close the loop, the better it is. So, and since only 9% is getting recycled, there's so much out there that hasn't, doesn't have a recycling outlet, that really our focus is on those materials, and those materials tend to have the highest pain point because these waste companies have to pay to dispose them in the landfill. So that's really the target, is that plastic that can't be recycled.
And so a lot of that plastic is some of the most annoying plastic. I think you're saying that you can take like garbage or the grocery sacks that are really terrible plastics, right? You can take those, make them into diesel fuel.
Mm-hmm.
With no toxic emissions.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable. Is there a way that consumers can start thinking about making sure that their I keep calling them crappy plastics get into the stream for you to use?
I mean, our first goal is to really try to educate consumers to reduce their plastic consumption to begin with. Something like the grocery bag, it's now there's, so much awareness about how harmful these are. And, it's great to see people more and more bringing their own tote bags, when they go shopping instead of using the paper or the plastic. And really, as a company, we're trying to focus more on raising that awareness because even though we can convert it to fuel, it's better to, just not create it to begin with. And we're actually launching in Salt Lake this fall a zero waste campaign where we're going to put more of our PK clean bins around the city and encourage people to reduce their waste to basically the size of a mason jar over a month. And we'll have these bins just sort of there in case you do happen to generate some, plastic waste that can't be recycled. We can at least convert it to fuel at PK Clean.
Wow, fantastic. Now, the way that you're selling the plants, you're selling them to, who's your typical customer for the plants?
So typically anyone who is generating large amounts of waste. So that tends to be either waste companies or manufacturers who are producing products that have large plastic waste streams as byproducts. And occasionally it will be cities and government agencies who might not have already outsourced a private contract to.
How many plants have you built so far? How many are in the pipeline?
Yeah, so we have the main facility is here in Salt Lake City, and then we have the second one under construction in Nova Scotia, and then we have a few more in the pipeline for next year, which are sort of around the world that we're looking at for those.
Okay, and as you expand, it seems to me that the potential here is almost infinite, right? I mean, 90% of plastics aren't recycled. Seems like huge potential here.
Yeah, we get literally hundreds of inquiries coming in from people all over the world, just who are trying to find a solution for their plastic waste. And for us, the challenge is we don't want to promise that we can make 100 of these in the next year. So we're sort of gradually scaling up and picking which sites make the most sense to begin with, and doing it in that order. But the hope is to eventually have it sort of cookie cutter enough that we can get out and
right. But what kind of scale are the plants you're building and looking at building operating at? How many barrels per day of production are they doing?
Yeah, so each sort of modular unit, it's a 10-ton per day unit, and that converts into roughly 60 barrels of fuel. and then it sort of scales up from there. So depending on, you know, how many of these modular units you want to have, you can have them all in parallel.
Yeah. Now, help me think through the environmental impact as it regards carbon. What is the best conceivable thing we could do with plastic from a carbon standpoint, and how does your operation compare to the best?
Yeah, you know, the thing with plastic that people don't realize is, you know, basically every single piece of plastic you've ever used still exists in some form. It doesn't just sort of disappear. And I think that sometimes is just like crazy to people. They're like, oh, doesn't it just disappear? But, you know, whether it's in a landfill, you know, they have studies that have shown that, you know, it's going to be in the same form in the landfill for hundreds of years. It doesn't naturally decompose, or it ends up in the ocean and becomes microplastics. It's still like, you know, they become smaller and smaller forms, but it's still there. Or, you know, even if you turn it into new plastic, you know, it's still there. And, you know, there's no way of just like, it just doesn't disappear. So it comes from, you know, fuel to begin with. And, you know, what people don't realize is that, you know, you have to make something out of it. You know, it doesn't just go away. And even in the landfill, studies have shown that it does release, you know, methane into the environment at small levels. So, you know, there's not really any way of like sequestering this plastic, and, you know, it's going to have some carbon impact. And, you know, from our perspective and looking at all the different alternatives of what to do, if you can't recycle it, you know, it's much better, instead of putting it into a landfill where it's going to sit for hundreds of years, and instead to use it, make a usable fuel. And the fuel can either be used to make new plastics if it's sent to like a plastic refining facility, or as a substitute for oil that needs to be drilled out of the ground. So, so really, when you look at sort of all the different places that plastic can go, and we've spent a lot of time looking at, you know, what can you do with the plastic? Like, this really does make sense to offset, you know, the need to drill plastic from out of the ground.
Now, methane is worse in terms of the impact on global warming than CO2.
Yeah.
We focus on CO2 because that's what cars produce, I think. But methane from a decomposing plastic bottle or a cow is probably worse per ton, right, than CO2?
Yeah, methane's about 20 times.
Is it fair to think of your diesel fuel as zero carbon because the carbon is already out there, or is that unfair? Am I being too kind?
I mean, it's where you draw the box. And, you know, yes, it is a fuel. You know, it does burn a bit more cleanly than, you know, regular fuel that comes out of the ground. And, you know, the key thing, and there has been a study by Argonne National Laboratory showing that, you know, plastic to fuel does overall reduce sort of the carbon emissions impact, especially when you compare it to, you know, drilling oil from the ground, which, you know, is much worse for the environment. So, you know, when you look at it from that sort of where you draw the box and look at, you know, everything that's going on, it does make sense from a carbon impact. But, you know, that being said, we're still creating a fuel, but the plastic has come from fuel, so it's not, there's no way of it disappearing, you know. So.
Right. Well, listen, you are an extraordinary individual in so many ways. You've been recognized multiple times for your entrepreneurship. Who do you look up to? Who do you admire? Who is your role model?
Yeah, what really you know, triggered me to get involved in this space initially was an Australian inventor who was a family friend of ours growing up, and his name was Percy Keane, and he was a chemistry inventor, and he had developed a series of technologies related to the environment, and he really sort of inspired me as a child. And he was a bachelor who'd converted his home into you know, a giant laboratory, and was testing various things, and really just dedicated his life to discovering all these technologies. And you know, he showed me at some point some fuel he'd made from waste, and, you know, sort of lit it with a match, and it really sort of sparked my imagination. You know, I didn't understand it as a child. And, later when I, came to study US and, I had the opportunity to go to both Stanford and MIT. And I, thought like, when you look back at Percy's technologies, he never had the opportunity to take it sort of beyond that laboratory level. At that point, he was quite elderly, and he ended up passing away at the age of 95. And at that time, I sort of looked back at some of his technologies, and the plastic to fuel was something he had looked at. And that's really sort of what inspired me to see if I could use sort of my resources and all that I'd been given through my education to take his work forward. And he hadn't done any of the engineering around it, which has really been the key challenge of scaling it up. But he sort of was the initial inspiration to sort of showing that, like if you really dedicate your life to, a cause, you can really, lead a meaningful life and have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got to ask, and please forgive the question, but as I think about chemical engineers who are out actually in the field doing things like building plants, like you're doing, I picture a friend of mine who died recently, who 6'4", 300 pounds, big guy, knew how to turn a wrench. And I'm trying to picture you in that environment. What kind of experiences, beyond having interviewers ask you really stupid questions, what has been your experience as a young woman in this field?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I think especially some of the more traditional people are just sort of a little bit surprised to see someone who looks so different. But I think there's advantages as well. I think I add sort of a completely different, type of outlook on the industry that, I'm able to sort of see it in a different way than others have. And, the way I have a co-founder who's a male, and, we're able to sort of, really create a more balanced workplace and see things, balance each other out. And we're so different that it, really sort of helps, us look at problems from many more dimensions. So, I'd say it's overall an advantage. And even just in terms of standing out, I think, it helps me, people remember me perhaps a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it can be challenging at times for people to take you seriously. And, I've had some people just sort of say things to my face, like, what does some like little like young girl, know, and, things like that. But
Yeah,
I don't let that get to me. It's, usually because of their own insecurities that they say things like that. So.
Yeah, you're obviously achieving great success despite those challenges, but it is, I am sure, at times interesting to walk in your shoes. You could be doing anything. Why have you chosen to do this?
Yeah, for me, it was, it wasn't like an aha moment. It was, several things in my life where I was, always very environmentally conscious. And, when I moved to the US, I was quite shocked when I had like my first internship in New York, and I just saw sort of the piles and mountains of waste everywhere. And, just, and I'd spent some time in Germany and, looking at the recycling system there. And, it's something that I've always been very passionate about. And, at some point I was at MIT, and I sort of connected all the dots of what I was, mostly interested in, and, what I really wanted to devote my life to. And this really made the most sense to combine my passion for technology, science, and the environment to, focus on a solution for, one of the biggest problems with the waste stream, which is the plastics that aren't getting recycled. And our hope as a company is to, go to other waste streams as well beyond plastics that also problematic. And, really our mission is to try to develop technologies and new ways of doing things that bring us to a society where we really move towards like zero landfill and try to close the loop as much as possible.
Yeah. What is your superpower?
I think I would say my superpower is just sort of creating bold visions for the company and sort of evolving that with time. And I think, as we've grown over the years, we've sort of sometimes we'll achieve something and, you know, my co-founder is like, wow, that's, you know, he could never see the vision, but like I sort of guided everyone and they're like, oh, wow, that's, you know, that's sort of how you envisioned it to begin with. And I think sort of creating these bold visions and, you know, directing everyone's efforts, you know, it's hard for everyone to see it, but, you know, guiding us to that next level. And so, yeah, I'd say that would be my main superpower is sort of, I have this like very strong vision of how I want the future to be and us sort of reusing everything and recycling. And, you know, that's sort of the path that we're on as a company.
Well, I'm so glad that you would take the time to be with us today. Before you go, I want you to just take a minute and tell people how they can learn more and connect with you personally.
Sure. Well, people can reach me. My social media handles P Bakaya. So on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, it's the same PBAKAYA. Or just to visit the website pkclean.com. And if you leave us a note on the contact form, that reaches me as well. So
fantastic. Well, Priyanka, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and want to wish you every success in scaling this business quickly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me today.
All righty. Let's do some good.